Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's time for the last of my monthly wrap-ups for 2022. So that's right, you might have noticed that I said the last of my monthly wrap-ups for 2022. That's because although this is my December wrap-up and that's where the year ends, I have put out a poll recently on my community tab where I asked if you'd like to see the kind of yearly stats, so my reading stats for the entirety of 2022. And with currently, I think it's about 130 votes on there, just under 85% of you have voted yes please, you'd like to see the stats, so that's something I'll work on and get to you in the next week or so. In the meantime though, let's focus on December's reading, where I finished off 7 books. I did start 2 others that I'm not going to include in these stats. One of them was a DNF, and I will mention that if I remember to, and the other one is an ongoing book that I just started early, but it is one of my January reads, so that one I'll obviously talk more about in January's wrap up. As usual, the stats first with the timestamps down below, so you can skip this section if you want to go straight to the books. But those 7 titles that I read in December encompassed 3,096 pages, giving me an average page count for the month of 442. And the average rating given for those books was 3.71. Now for the annual stats, that gives me a final reading figure for 2022 of 35,584 pages at an average of 499, and literally the last book that I read in December just took my average below 500 to that 499. The average rating over the year was 3.90. For the series then, I started 23 different series for 2022, finished 7. I'm up to date in 13 of the series that I'm reading at the moment, and if you add in the ones that I'm not yet up to date with as well, there's a total of 30 different series that I currently count as being ongoing. And then it seems like a long time ago for me somehow, but the last 5-star read that I had was just 15 days ago at the time of filming. Onto the books then. I'm going to start with the DNF before I forget about it, because I haven't actually written it down in my notes, because that's where I've got the star ratings that I gave everything. But I did try out the audio of Seasons of Elberdone by Alain Marché and Christopher Warman, and I decided, although it was quite a short book and I didn't have too many hours left in it, I did decide to stop it because I wasn't really getting anything from it. It was also a dual narration, and one of the narrators is the author, or one of the authors, Alain Marché, and her narration was absolutely fine. I had no problem with it. But the second of the seasons that I was listening to was narrated by someone else, and I really didn't get his narration at all. It really didn't kind of vibe with me, and that really turned me off listening to it. But also, as I say, I wasn't really getting anything from the story itself, so with that in combination with the narration that I wasn't getting on with, I decided to put it down and move on to something else. If we start at the start of the month though, and I'll run through these as usual in the order that I read or listened to them, and the first book of the month, or the first book that I finished rather in the month, was also an audiobook. This one was On the Winds of Quasars by T.A. Bruno. This is book 2 in his Song of Kamaria series. Now I quite enjoyed the first book, In the Orbit of Sirens, but I didn't get on quite as well with this second book in the series. I felt like, again, I didn't really get too much from it. It seemed like instead of being not necessarily a space opera, because it's all set on a planet, there's no real ships and planet hopping or anything along those lines, but I felt that it wasn't really very much of a sci-fi, or certainly a far future sci-fi. Too much of the story for me sounded like it was taking place on Earth. You've got some technology and you've got some aliens and monsters and things along those lines, but if you take those out of it, everything else just sounded like it was modern day Earth to me, and it sounded really strange for this sci-fi, especially after coming off the back of book 1. So this one wasn't great for me. It's not necessarily that middle book syndrome. I know other people who've read this one and still really enjoyed it. It just didn't work for me. I am still going to continue with this series because there's just one book left to finish it off, but I'm not sure when I'm going to get to it, because obviously the experience that I had with book 2 has kind of put me off it a little bit, so I'm going to let that kind of fade from my memory a little bit before I go back to it and finish off with book 3. So this one, not a great start to the month and not a great continuation of this series for me. I ended up giving it 3 stars. My next book was, to be honest, a book that I wouldn't normally read. I am reading all of the finalists of SPF B08 along with a group of other booktubers or bloggers for Cassidy's kind of alternate SPF B08 final. And the book that my patrons chose from a selection for me to read first out of the ones that I hadn't already read was Scales and Sensibility by Stephanie Burgess. This is book one in her Regency Dragons series. And there's so much about it just from the title, the cover, the series title. Everything here sort of screams to me this is not a book for you. But I'll go into these books anyway with an open mind, and I will, in the reviews that I put out, I will specify that this is not a book for me. So straight away, it's not likely that I'm going to have a really great time with this, but hopefully, you know, there might be a surprise and I might have something to take away from it. With this particular book, I didn't like pretty much anything about it. And it's really difficult to review because I know that I'm not going to like it. And as much as I want to, it's very difficult to kind of take myself out of the situation, take away everything that I normally like and just judge the book for what it is. But the main part of the kind of rating, and even if you break it down to, like I do, a weighted rating or the rubric for Cassidy's SPF B08 final, it's very difficult to place a book within those ratings if you do not enjoy it, because it is naturally going to have an impact on the different areas that you're looking at. Now, one of the things that I actually did like about this book, I know I said I didn't like anything, but the story, the characters, the setting, I just did not like it. But the writing itself was actually very good. And where I was, I'll be honest, forcing myself to read this, it was very easy to do so, even though I wasn't having a good time, because the writing was very good and it just flowed quite well, even though I wasn't having a great time with it. So that is really, really strange. It was very strange when I was reading it, and I will put that in my written review. That's the thing that I will really focus on, because I am not the target audience for this book, but I definitely appreciated the writing, even if I didn't appreciate anything else from it. So I'm not going to talk about the story, I'm not going to talk about any of the other aspects of it. I'll just leave it as that and say it's a very well written book. If you like this kind of thing, if you are the target audience for this book, I would suggest that you could have a really good time with it. I didn't, because I'm not the target audience, so there we go. So this one for me, because I do still give it a star rating, I gave it 2.5 stars. I did finish the book, I didn't enjoy it, but at least the writing did help me get through it. From there though, I moved on to Mark Timoney's The Blood of the Spear. This is book one of his Eye of Eternity series, and conversely, I went from my lowest rating of the month at 2.5 stars. I gave this one 5 stars, and it was my favourite book of the month. Part of it, I guess, it would have been helped out by the fact that I'd come off the back of a book that I really didn't enjoy, and then to have something that I was really feeling comfortable with, I was right at home with, maybe that heightened my enjoyment of it, I don't know. But I did really have a good time with this. It's very much one of those staples of my reading tastes, where it feels like classic fantasy, but it's got a modern writing style to it. I absolutely adore that, and I got that in this one. I have said this before because I mentioned this book in my top 10 books of 2022, so go check that one out in the link in the corner there. But I did say that it's very quickly paced but without feeling rushed, and I really appreciated that. It does take quite a bit of skill to cover the amount of ground in both story and character development as you've got in this book without rushing it, or without being sort of 2 or 3 times the thickness. So it was very well written. I had a great time with it, and as I said, this one was a 5-star read for me. So we went from down to up, and then we go down again a little bit. The next book I finished was an audiobook, and this one took me quite a while, partly as well because I had a pause in the middle of it because I just really wasn't getting on with it. And sadly for me, because this is one I was really looking forward to for quite a long time, this was The Forgetting Moon by Brian Lee Durfee, book 1 in the 5 Warrior Angels. Now, there were lots of aspects that I thought I would really have a good time with. Kind of the bits that I've just explained with Blood of the Spear, where it's the classic vibe, it's got loads of those classic fantasy tropes, and it's got a modern writing style. But conversely to the Blood of the Spear, I just really didn't get on with this one. There was too much in it that I didn't like, and not enough in it that I did like. So one of the negatives that I've heard people talking about with this book is all of the tropes in it, which does not mean anything to me in terms of discrediting, I guess, a fantasy book, because fantasy is built on tropes. If there were no tropes in it, it wouldn't be a fantasy, or it would be a very, very bland one. I didn't have a problem, therefore, with any of that side of it. It was just a normal fantasy book in that respect. But the writing, the story, I don't know, it just didn't work for me. I think part of it is because I didn't really gel with any of the characters. I cannot pick out a single one that I really had any positive feelings for. And it's not that they were all terrible characters, the way that they're written, they're meant to be like that. It was just, I didn't get anything from them whatsoever. The story, I think, was okay. The overall premise may have been done before, but I did quite like it. But I didn't like the way it was all pulled together. And one of the key things that I didn't like about this was the repetition, which made it feel like I was just not moving forward with the story at all. So you've got different groups of people and different POVs, and you'll move around between them like any multicast fantasy story. And I was finding that I would have one group of people, and then we would move to another group, and there was a fight in a gladiator pit, and then we go to another group of people and another, and then we come back and there's a fight in the gladiator pit, and it always just felt the same. It seemed to be the same scene just repeating over and over. There would be a gladiator decapitating someone, picking up the head and throwing it into the lap of the bishop sitting in the gantry. And I must have come back to that scene about 3 or 4 times, and I just started to zone out because it was all just exactly the same, and I literally felt like I was just replaying the same scene over and over, and then there was a story going around outside of that, and then we'd just come back to this one every now and then. So that was one of the key kind of takeaways that I had from this, because it really stuck out as just that real repetition of one particular scene. So I didn't really like that. I didn't like the book much overall, and I've decided not to carry on with this one, even though I've heard people say that the second book is better. I don't really want to find out, because I have to really enjoy the first book enough to make me want to carry on with the series, and I didn't have that here. So I gave the Forgetting Moon 3 stars, and then I'll go and forget about it. The next audiobook that I listened to was much shorter, so I actually finished it before my print book that I was reading at the same time, and this one was Season of Kings by A.J. Redger. So I received an audio code for this one from the author, as well as actually a digital copy, so I decided that I would listen to it, which really did help me after the audiobook that I had that I didn't get on with there with the Forgetting Moon. And this one was very different. It was quite short, which was why I was able to finish it in just a couple of days. It was quite enjoyable. It was again multi-POV, not as many as the Forgetting Moon. It had a quite quick pace. It had a good storyline, a good overall story with the individual parts of it all pulling together quite nicely. The narration on it was pretty good as well. I thought the narrator was quite enthusiastic, and he was very animated with what he was talking about, not just in the voices, but when he's talking around it, the dialogue tags that he used as he was doing the character voices would kind of echo the emotions, I guess, of the characters. So when someone was laughing, he was laughing as he was doing the narrative part around it as well. And it kind of tied it all together, because otherwise it sounds really strange when you're doing a voice and it's very mirthful, and then you've got kind of a played narration around it. It just takes you out a little bit sometimes. So I think the narrator did a good job there. The story itself was quite enjoyable. It wasn't really anything new, but it was definitely something that I got along with. And I don't know anything about book 2 of this series, but when I do hear about it, I'd definitely be interested in continuing, because I had a good time overall with this one. So I gave Season of Kings 4 stars. It was definitely an enjoyable collection of characters, a good story, and a very quick read. Next up, I had a review copy from the author of A Shade of Madness, Book 2 in Thiago Abdalla's Ashes of Averin. And I've read now the first book in the series and the prequel novella that came afterwards. So that's A Touch of Light and A Prelude to Ashes. And then A Shade of Madness continues exactly where we finish A Touch of Light. And I really appreciate that with the stories. These guys over my shoulder do it really well. John Gwynn's writing, he always does tend to carry on pretty much from the same scene the previous book finishes. So you can read them back to back as just one long story if you want to and if you're able to. And with this one, I definitely appreciated it because sometimes you have a bit of a cliffhanger, I guess, ending in one book, and then you have the second book and it's set maybe 1 month later or something, and you're spending a bit of time filling in the gaps, what's happened next. So there's none of that here. You just carry on exactly from the scene that you left off. So that definitely worked well. The character work here was really good. There was some good development, especially for my point. Nasha as one of the characters I didn't really enjoy much. Certainly of the 3 point of view characters in A Touch of Light, Nasha was the one that I didn't really get on with so much, but her character here definitely improved for me, and I actually quite liked her storyline as a result. There was a 4th point of view character here as well, Cadmus, who added something a little extra to the story. He added almost a personal touch because you do have the personal element in A Touch of Light with Adrian's story. That's kind of moved on a little bit here, and you get the personal element in this one through Cadmus with a very different story. So I definitely appreciated that. The characters overall I thought were pretty good. The side characters as well really built into it. What I really liked about this one was some of the revelations that you got, and a lot of that was built into little bits and pieces that were foreshadowed earlier on. So in A Touch of Light, there's some really tiny little scenes that you could just skip past, you forget about, because it's inconsequential. They don't really mean anything at the time, but they're brought up again here as part of a big revelation, and it's not like it's really thrown in your face and do you remember this happening? This was important, but we didn't make it important at the time. The way it was brought up, I thought, was really nice. It was organic, it was natural to the storyline without really force feeding you. So I really appreciated that, and I liked the work that it suggested had gone into it, all of the planning. So that definitely worked very well for me. There's still so much scope for this series, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the next book. And I can't remember whether it's 4 or 5 books in the series in total that have been planned, but I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. This one I gave 4 stars to. It was very close to getting 4.5 stars because I did have a really good time with it. And then I finished off my month and indeed my year with a sci-fi. This is another review copy I got from the author, and this is Eclipse by Herman Stonenagle, book 1 of Fractured Orbit. Now, this is an opening salvo in a new sci-fi series. The author has got other works that he's done. He's got a couple of other series, but I haven't actually read anything from him or even really heard of him, but I will check him out because I had a good time reading this. This is definitely my kind of sci-fi. I mentioned before the kind of the space opera that I really like, and that's what I got here. You've got Eclipse itself is a space station. You've got a ship on the front cover there, and you spend most of the time on one or the other, so either on the space station or on the space shuttle Redemption. And you've got a combination here of characters and events that really worked for me, and I really enjoyed the storyline being pushed through them. There are various little twists in here. There's nothing that's necessarily over the top or new, but I think it just worked really well. I did enjoy the kind of the intrigue of the story that resulted from that. I thought it was all very well done. The reveals were quite subtle, really. It allowed you the time to work things out for yourself without making it feel like you were doing the work. So the storytelling was definitely something that I appreciated here. I have added this to my ongoing list because I'm definitely interested in continuing the series with book 2 scheduled for some time in 2023. So this one I gave 4.5 stars to, rounding out 2023 on a very nice high. So that was my December, and the last wrap up I've got for my 2022 reading. As I said at the start of the video, I will do a kind of combination wrap up where I'll look at all of the different months, throwing in some of the different stats, looking at my favourite book of each month and so forth. So that one will be with you in around about a week or so. I'm not exactly sure at this point where in the scheduling that's going to come, but it is going to be coming. Let me know in the comments down below how your December reading went. What was your favourite book of the month, and have you got any recommendations from your December reading that I might like? Whilst you're down there, as usual, check out the social media and support the channel links, including my book club Discord and my Patreon, where we'd love to have you come along and join in the conversation. I'll hopefully see you in the next video sometime soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.